forcing Solid 8's Michael Lofthouse to apologize. Anti-Asian incidents like this have only been increasing as President Trump continues to use phrases like
Kung flu.
Even after the World Health Organization discouraged coronavirus names that stigmatize groups of people, President Donald Trump continues to use anti-Asian racist descriptions to describe COVID-19.
It's got all different names. Wuhan. Wuhan was catching on.
For conservative Asian Americans who once supported President Trump in 2016, how are they reconciling the support of the president and his use of racist words? For that, we spoke with Cliff Lee, the executive director of the National Committee of Asian American Republicans. He was also on the Asian Pacific American Advisory Committee for the 2016 Trump-Pence campaign.
It concerns us more that the crowd actually chanted about the coronavirus, and certainly the president worked with it.
Kung flu. Kung flu.
Asian Americans are the fastest growing voter demographic. They make up 5% of the nation's eligible voters. And while they mostly lean Democratic, nearly a quarter of all Asian American voters went Republican in 2016. The numbers may seem small, but they could have an outsized impact in a close election. And while Lee initially voted for Trump in 2016 because of policies like tax cuts and deregulation, he's concerned that the rise of anti-Asian incidents have hit close to home. His 7-year-old daughter was bullied in school.
A boy in the school is telling other boys that my daughter is from China, so stay away from her. I can feel my own daughter, my own little daughter, is feeling the threat simply because she looks Chinese or she looks Asian.
Stop AAPI Hate has been tracking anti-Asian incidents around the country. From March 19th to June 24th, they received more than 2,000 reports of discrimination that includes verbal harassment, physical assault, and being coughed on. Professor Russell Jung launched the organization and has seen a correlation between Trump's anti-Asian words and a spike in anti-Asian incidents.
Using those terms creates an association that the virus is Chinese and that Chinese people have the virus. And by creating that association, people then develop an implicit bias and began to racially profile Asians as being diseased, blaming people for the disease rather than it just being a natural virus. That opened up license for people to harass and attack Asians.
Despite President Trump's use of racist terms and hateful actions of some of his supporters, Lee thinks there's a difference in the president's public and private persona because of the inconsistencies in his messaging.
I have always feel that the President Trump himself is not a racist. It is the campaign year. Sometimes he had to work with the crowd.
Lee told Newsy his members aren't as enthusiastic in this 2020 election as they were in 2016. Based on their survey, 40% will vote for Trump, and the other 60% aren't sure. We're 4 months away from the election, and the organization has yet to decide if they will back Trump this November.
We want to see how President be able to unite the country. We cannot have a divided country.
Kat Sandoval, Newsy.
The head of the FBI has accused China of coercing Chinese-born critics living in the U.S. to return home. FBI Director Christopher Wray says U.S. citizens are among those targeted as Beijing works to silence critics of its political and human rights issues. He says Chinese authorities have gone as far as to threaten and even arrest the families of those who refuse to return to China. Wray also says almost half of the nearly 5,000 active FBI counterintelligence cases are related to China and warns Beijing is attempting to replace the U.S. as a world leader.
China is engaged in a whole-of-state effort to become the world's only superpower by any means necessary. And over the past decade, we've seen economic espionage cases with a link to China increase by approximately 1,300%. The stakes could not be higher, and the potential economic harm to American businesses and the economy as a whole almost defies calculation.
The deputy director of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs says Ray's claims are a political scheme to deceive citizens and conceal America's own problems. He said Ray's remarks ignore basic facts and are full of political lies. It fully exposed his deep-rooted Cold War thinking and ideological prejudice. China firmly opposes this. Ray said China's threats do not specifically target the presidential election in November, but the Chinese preferences could introduce some implications. For Newsy, I'm Gage Jackson.
In a new, nearly 100-page civil rights audit commissioned by Facebook, the report's authors determined Facebook's decision to leave up several posts by President Donald Trump, which clearly violated platform rules, was a devastating error that could allow Facebook to be further abused by bad actors. The report described Facebook's civil rights efforts as a seesaw of progress and setbacks that had led to uneven rule enforcement across the platform. On the topic of content moderation, auditors found that while Facebook has no qualms about reining in speech around the anti-vaccine movement, it's been far too reluctant to adopt strong rules to limit misinformation and voter suppression. For example, they noted that Facebook took no action around a series of President Trump's posts calling vote-by-mail ballots illegal, despite the fact that auditors said the president's posts did indeed violate platform policies about providing misleading information about voting. Paul Barrett, a disinformation researcher at New York University, told Newsy this uneven enforcement often happens because social media companies are afraid of potential backlash.
When confronted with health-related problems, attempts to mislead users about health-related issues, that the platforms are much more comfortable in being aggressive and going after untrue material. In the political realm, I think they feel a lot of anxiety about taking down or otherwise diminishing this or that piece of content because they're afraid that whoever was a proponent of that content is going to get angry at them.
The auditors said that Facebook's decision to allow President Trump's posts on voter suppression and violence toward protesters raised grave concerns. Specifically, they worried that this lack of enforcement may set a precedent where politicians routinely exploit Facebook while undermining its civil rights efforts. Still, the audit found Facebook is making progress in some areas, such as making a historic civil rights settlement that helped limit discrimination in its ad targeting systems and pledging to hire more black executives over the next 5 years. It's unclear what, if any, changes will be made as a result of this report. In a press release responding to the audit, COO Sheryl Sandberg wrote that Facebook still has a long way to go, and admitted the company won't make every change they call for, but will put more of their proposals into practice. Tyler Atkinson, Newsy, Chicago.
In the Navajo Nation and Native American communities across America, COVID-19 is hitting hard.
The Navajo Nation is going through some tough times right now.
According to the latest numbers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaskan Native people have an age-adjusted COVID-19 hospitalization rate that is 5.7 times that of non-Hispanic white people. On Wednesday, Native American communities called on Congress to address long-standing infrastructure problems on tribal lands that have hurt their ability to fight the growing epidemic. In a remote hearing with the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, tribal leaders cited a need for assistance in filling voids in agriculture, healthcare systems, and sanitation.
These disparities have led to our vulnerability and the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 to our communities, both in terms of our infection rates and rate of death.
The problems are especially acute for the Navajo Nation. Since the time of the first case of the virus in March, the Navajo Nation has documented some of the highest rates of infection in the U.S., with roughly 8,000 confirmed cases as of July 7th.
As a result of the chronic underfunding of Indian programs, which was mentioned earlier, tribes were not equipped with prompt and adequate resources to respond to COVID-19.
NES is now calling on Congress for urgent help with the broadband and electricity problems, and for help cutting through bureaucratic delays.
Red tape is as much to blame as funding. It takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years to get the necessary approvals for infrastructure.
The Democratic coronavirus relief bill, known as the HEROES Act, would provide $20 billion to tribal nations to help deal with the epidemic. But the bill, which passed the House in May, is now stalled. For Newsy, I'm Maggie Hillen.
The FBI is investigating after a black man in Indiana says he was beaten by a group of men who threatened to lynch him. Vox Booker's lawyer said Tuesday the FBI is investigating the reported assault as a hate crime, though the AP says there's been no confirmation of that.
We want this investigated as a hate crime. It was clearly racially motivated.
Booker said he and his friends were trying to get to a public beach near Bloomington, Indiana on Saturday. They were blocked by a group of men who said the path they were taking to the public beach was on private property. The situation escalated, and Booker said the men began holding him against his will against a tree, screamed white power, and threatened to get a noose.
You could feel the anger and the intent to try to hurt me.
Booker walked away from the incident with a concussion, ripped out hair, and abrasions. Police were called, but no one was arrested at the scene. Booker said his life was saved by friends and bystanders who stepped in to confront the reported attackers.
I had friends and strangers who were willing to put their lives and their bodies on the line. Without these folks, I would be a hashtag.
For Newsy, I'm Josh Crane.
We're going through a really tough time right now all around the world. And COVID-19 is still in.
I guess that's why Trump likes her so much, huh?
Impacting so many people. If you survived it, then you're the heroes we need. The plasma that's in your blood can literally save lives. And we have to act fast. So please donate. You fought for your life. Now, let's work. Together to take down COVID-19. To donate plasma, go to the Fight to Present. Us.org.
Chile, a siren of mourning wails for a fallen hospital nurse lost to COVID-19. She is eulogized as a martyr in the pandemic ravaging Latin America, with no let-up in sight. Latin America and the Caribbean this week surpassed 3 million coronavirus cases, and 4 countries, Brazil, Peru, Chile, and Mexico, rank among the top 8 in the world in known infections. On Tuesday, Pan American Health Organization Director Carissa Etienne said the pandemic is reaching staggering proportions in the region, with a 20% spike in coronavirus cases in just 1 week. That amounts to more than 735,000 new infections.
What we are seeing now is not a second wave. This is still the first wave, and I'm afraid it continues to grow. This wave is moving within each country, affecting areas that have not had many cases before. And this trend is concerning.
Chile is a case in point. The country of just 19 million people now ranks 6th in the world in coronavirus cases, with more than 300,000 infections and 6,400 deaths. Just to the north is Peru. With 32 million residents, it is 5th in total cases, with more than 309,000, and 10th in deaths, with nearly 11,000. Peru on June 30th eased quarantine restrictions in 17 of its 24 provinces, as Martín Vizcarra warned the populace to wear masks and not to just go out as if the virus has disappeared. He said it is Peru's reality now.
El virus no va a desaparecer mientras que el esfuerzo de la ciencia no encuentre una vacuna. Mientras tanto, vamos a convivir con él.
Since June 1st, deaths have nearly tripled in Mexico, with its 32,000 fatalities ranking 5th in the world, and its nearly 270,000 infections 8th. Mexico City, once fast reopening, is imposing new lockdowns. And this is the scene in Brazil, which ranks 2nd behind the U.S. in COVID-19 cases and deaths. President Jair Bolsonaro, who notoriously downplayed the pandemic, tested positive for the virus this week. But these protesters holding photos of lost loved ones aren't about to give him a pass. For Newsy, I'm Peter Hecht.
For decades, billionaire George Soros has poured his tremendous wealth into causes that advance the Democratic Party, which has made him a notorious target of the right. A new book called The Influence of Soros, Politics, Power, and the Struggle for an Open Society explores how the 89-year-old is still pushing his ideals to shape America. For more on this, we're joined by Emily Tamkin, author of The Influence of Soros. Emily, it's good to have you with us this morning. How has Soros been involved in the 2020 election so far?
Oh, he's already poured millions of dollars into this election through his PAC. And I think, this book sort of goes over the 3 realms in which Soros has been influential: the financial, the philanthropic, and the political. And I think that what we're seeing in the 2020 election is that he is not taking his foot off the gas in that last realm, because I think that he sees Trump and his ideology as a threat to the concept of an open society.
And it's interesting because Soros obviously has made news in the past. Unfortunately, there have been horrific attacks against him, from the pipe bombs to the anti-Semitism that we've seen, but his name hasn't been in the press as much. Is he doing this anonymously, or is there a reason that he hasn't been getting as much attention in this cycle?
His name has been, I have the George Soros Google alert on, so I know that he has been, his political donations have been written about. I think that there's just so much going on in this world of ours that maybe compared to the election of 2004, when he made his entrance into American political giving, it's been drowned out by some of what's going on. His name has been mentioned more in terms of conspiracy theories connected to the coronavirus pandemic, and in particular to the protests against police brutality. He's been accused of putting those on or orchestrating them. So I think that is the way in which his name's been brought up more recently.
And in terms of that, Emily, I mean, why does the right continually go after them? Is it because he is a significant power player in the Democratic Party, and that his money really can be put to work to the benefit of the Democrats?
I mean, I think it's three things. I think one, yes, exactly as you said, he does have a lot of influence and money and power. The second is that his identity is such that being a foreign-born Jewish person who lives in New York and works in finance, the conspiracy theories are effective. You can very easily play on people's prejudices when you talk about George Soros. But the third and most important reason, I think, is that so much of his philanthropic and political giving has been about this idea of open society and of bringing more people to the discussion, to the debate, around the table. That is a very threatening thing to people. So when you say, oh, Soros is orchestrating the Black Lives Matter anti-police brutality protests, what you're saying, aside from pushing an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in which one Jewish man is like orchestrating mass protests, you're also taking away the legitimacy of this marginalized group, right? And you're pushing them further into the margins. You're saying, well, they don't really have legitimate reason to be marching, when in fact they do.
Let's talk about his donations. Unfortunately, this is a man who has, as you mentioned, just been surrounded in all sorts of attacks, certainly from the right. But in terms of the money that he's been putting up, especially during this 2020 election season, is it going to Biden's campaign? Is it going to some of these down ballot races? What have you been able to glean from the data that you've been following?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of all over the place. In 2004, his giving was focused on get out the vote efforts around the country, and I think that is sort of what we're seeing again to try to make sure that that people who would vote Democratic get out and vote. He also gives, and I go over this in greater detail in the book, to not only to the top of the ticket, or as you say, or to major races, but he's also given to progressive prosecutors' races in their district attorney elections around the country, which again goes back to this idea of trying to put people in power who could push reforms to make ours a more inclusive, equitable system.
He has been a supporter also of the wealth tax, Emily, and even though Biden has warned his donors, perhaps to their begroan, that he does intend to raise taxes, he hasn't outright come out and said it would be exclusively a wealth tax, at least not to my knowledge. Do we know if Soros is pushing that on the Biden campaign, and do you think it'll be effective?
I'll be honest, I don't know if he's pushed it to the Biden campaign. I know that originally he came out and said that he thought that Elizabeth Warren would be the strongest candidate against Trump. He said that last fall to the New York Times. And we know that he has pushed the wealth tax, and whether or not he said it to Biden specifically, I don't know and don't want to claim that I have knowledge of those conversations, but he has signed on to this and has been a vocal supporter of it. What this would do would be to redistribute wealth and with it power and influence. I think there's a tension that I go over of how can we have an open, equitable, free, fair society when one person has this much money and with it power and influence. And I think the wealth tax is one way at getting at addressing that.
Do you think Soros will be putting more money up right here for the Democratic Party between now and the election, just roughly 100 days away, Emily?
I think he will. Yeah, he's already. I think the number is $40 million that he's already put into 2020. I mean, I don't discuss this with the Soros cohort, so I don't want to claim that I have any insider knowledge of that. But I would expect that yes, he would give more between now and then.
All right, Emily Tampkin, she's the author of The Influence of Soros, Politics, Power, and the Struggle for an Open Society. Emily, thank you.
There's work to do.
To help save lives and to rebuild the economy.
Work. We can do for right here. Upwork is giving $1 million in talent grants.
Look, you're such a fucking asshole.
I'm sitting there taxing. You do it when you're taxing. I come in there and say something to you, you jump all over me.
You're talking about that liar.
What do you have? What about him?
He's available.
Help to counter
Trying to get him.
lending our expertise in tech, creative, and operations as the world's largest network.
Hey. Are you serious? Oh, yeah.
Of independent professionals, we're here to help. Go to upwork.com/worktogether to learn more.
Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a key witness in President Trump's impeachment inquiry, has announced his retirement from the Army after more than 21 years of service. According to the Associated Press, Vindman's lawyer said he was retiring after it became clear Vindman would not be able to further advance his career. The lawyer said Vindman endured a campaign of bullying, intimidation, and retaliation by the Trump administration. Vindman previously served as the top Ukraine advisor on the National Security Council, but was fired by President Trump in February after testifying before Congress. He told lawmakers in part that he had raised concerns internally about President Trump's phone call with the Ukrainian president about an investigation into Joe Biden and his son. His testimony was sharply criticized by President Trump, who called him insubordinate in a tweet. Vindman served in Iraq and received several honors during his career, including a Purple Heart. His retirement still has to be approved by the Army, and the process usually takes months. For Newsy, I'm Gage Jackson.
I don't understand why black people have to die in order to make change in this country.
There is this growing movement across the country around defunding the police.
The decision to end the work of the plainclothes unit and change to a more modern, community-based approach.
This is a moment like the March on Washington in 1963. This is that moment after Rodney King combined together.
What's the message that they're sending? That we're inhuman? That we can just be beat up? We can just be kicked on just because we're black?
So you have advocacy, you have protest, you have legislation.
And there are a lot of serious conversations around what the next step in reforming police departments looks like.
I believe that we need deep structural reform.
Get rid of the thought that you can arrest your way into a safer community. It's failed policy. It's never worked. It will never work. And you got to build relationships with the community.
For the last many decades, we have funded more police to combat crime. And we've also seen that police are armed with military equipment more suited to a war zone than to our communities and our neighborhoods. In 1991, we saw violent crime peak in this country, and what the country did was really respond to crime in America through this sort of punitive laws, punitive funding streams that resulted in the over-policing of black communities, the over-policing of marginalized communities in this country, and resulted in mass incarceration, where we have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. 1 in 3 black men are incarcerated in their lifetime, compared to 1 in 17 white men. And our country's racism is evident in the number of black men and women who are killed without justification by law enforcement officers. Black Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by police officers than white Americans.
And I always say, this is just my little trifecta for social change. Litigation, legislation, protest with a vision for where we want to go equals social change.
I am proud to announce the launch of the Chicago Police Department's Use of Force Community Working Group.
Effective immediately, I am declaring a categorical moratorium on the use of tear gas for the dispersal or control of crowds.
I think that defunding police departments is not so much about taking away all the funding for police officers, but it's about equalizing the duties of police officers with the government agencies. There have been massive changes made in the area of education and race, even the military and race, voting rights, civil liberties. But what makes this time different is that people have finally realized that without a change in criminal justice, all those other changes are undermined. Because someone with an education, someone with a nice house and a nice job is running down in the street by a police officer with impunity.
We know bill reform faces a variety of challenges. Among the largest being that policing is inherently local, and there are 18,000 police departments in the United States. However, federal oversight of police departments can be a very significant tool for helping police departments reform how their officers interact and engage with the communities that they are sworn to protect. For example, the Obama administration oversaw more than 20 investigations into potential abuses of police power, culminating in what's called consent decrees. And Attorney General Sessions made it quite difficult for the current Justice Department to open new pattern or practice investigations.
I'm just trying to get a simple answer.
Well, I'll give
I
you a
hope that
simple
you would.
answer. It's a difficult thing for a city to be sued by the Department of Justice.
And since President Trump took office, the Justice Department has publicly announced only one pattern or practice investigation into a local police department. So that's been a key change and a true paring back of federal oversight of police. We really need to reimagine how we redefine public safety in this country, and that has to include a reinvestment into communities that we've divested from.
How can it be that the second most violent city in America is laying off almost half its police force?
We were in a public safety crisis in 2012. Our violent crime rates were exceeding that of third world countries. Our murder rate was 18 times the national average. And what essentially happened was we created a county police force and essentially fired everybody that became a city police force. Under the new department, we were able to revise our use of force policy, one in which we got the input from the community. We had a higher sense of legitimacy with the public than once before. They would give us the benefit of the doubt, and they would wait to see if we would take appropriate action. And that moment of pause is what gave the ability, even to this day, to see, just to lower the temperature in the environment.
I know most of these officers are people who go into policing because they care about people. But if they wanted to be social workers, they would have gone to social work school. You know, they wanted to be doctors, they would have gone to medical school. We're calling on them to do all these things, to be psychiatrists, to be parents to little kids. We're calling on police officers to do things well beyond what police officers are supposed to be doing at a time in which crime is going down.
This is the moment that advocates, community members, policymakers need to take advantage of and not lose the momentum to make real transformative change in this country. All of these reforms are important, and that's why we need to think holistically and transformatively.
President Donald Trump threatened to withhold funding from schools that don't restart in-person classes in the fall. He made the comments on Twitter Wednesday. He also said the CDC guidelines on reopening schools amid the coronavirus pandemic are very tough and expensive. However, on Wednesday, Vice President Mike Pence said the White House will be fully respectful of states that can't fully reopen schools.
There may be some states and local communities that, given cases or positivity in that community, may adjust to either a certain set of days or certain limitations. And we'll be very respectful of that.
The director of the CDC says the guidance is intentional for reopening and keeping U.S. schools open. The agency is expected to issue new guidelines on reopening schools next week. The Trump administration has accused opponents of wanting schools to stay shuttered for political reasons. Those opponents argue that reopening schools too early puts the nation's students at risk. State and local governments are mostly responsible for schools, but the federal government provides them with some funding. For Newsy, I'm Stephanie Sandoval.
We are a generation that doesn't want to just get by. We want to get ours. Get justice. Get clean. Get a job we love. Get together. There are more young people than any other voting group, but we show up to vote at. Half the rate of older generations. If we want to get this future we believe in, we have to show. Up. Pledge to vote for Democrats in 2020.
Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are suing the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Department of Homeland Security to support international students who attend their universities. On Monday, the Trump administration issued a new order barring some 1 million international students from staying in the U.S. if they take classes entirely online this fall amid the coronavirus pandemic. The order says students must depart from the country or take other measures such as transferring to a school with in-person instruction. But on Wednesday, Harvard and MIT filed a lawsuit in Boston's federal court asking it to declare the rule unlawful and stop ICE and DHS from enforcing it. Harvard's president said the federal order came without notice and that it appears that it was designed purposefully to place pressure on colleges and universities to open their on-campus classrooms for in-person instruction this fall without regard to concerns for the health and safety of students, instructors, and others. The Department of Homeland Security defended the order deporting international students, telling CNN If they're not going to be a student or they're going to be 100% online, then they don't have a basis to be here. The order comes as the U.S. passes 3 million confirmed coronavirus cases, including about 130,000 deaths. Colleges and universities across the country have been finalizing plans for how they'll proceed with classes in the fall so students can maintain a quality education in the safest way possible.
Do what?
Said ICE's order disrupts our international students' lives and jeopardizes
Shut the blinds.
He also said welcoming the world's brightest, most talented, and motivated students is an essential American strength, and that international students are unequivocally welcomed there. Harvard and MIT said they will pursue the case vigorously to make sure international students across the country can continue their studies without the threat of deportation. For Newsy, I'm Johanna Brenaway.
Activists with the Movement for Black Lives have unveiled their proposal to transform the criminal justice system. The coalition includes Black Lives Matter and 150 other organizations. The group's proposed legislation, called the BREATHE Act, would divest federal resources from incarceration and policing. It would eliminate agencies like the Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Drug Enforcement Administration. The proposal also seeks to end programs like the Department of Defense 1033, which lets local law enforcement have excess military equipment. Activists want to change criminal justice practices they say disproportionately criminalize minority communities. Right now, the police reform effort on Capitol Hill has stalled as Democrats and Republicans failed to agree on how far policing changes should go. So far, no member of Congress has said whether they will introduce the bill. For Newsy, I'm Caitlin Baldwin.
Alexander Vindman is retiring from the U.S. military. You'll remember that name because Vindman was very much a key witness in President Trump's impeachment trial. NBC's Peter Alexander is following this one. Peter, what do we know about Colonel Vindman's retirement?
Yeah, Craig, I just received a statement from the attorney for Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. He is retiring, according to the statement, after 21 years, more than 21 years of military service as a member of the U.S. Army. According to his lawyer, he determined that his future in the armed forces, quote, will forever be limited, in effect, due to the political retaliation that the lawyer says Vindman has seen from the president and from the president's allies. In the stinging statement that we just received, the attorney writes that through a campaign of bullying, intimidation, and retaliation, the president of the United States attempted to force Lieutenant Colonel Vindman to choose between adhering to the law or pleasing a president. Goes on to say that he is putting the interests of his country ahead of his own. His patriotism, they note, has cost him his career. They say today our country loses a devoted soldier, but it is incumbent upon all of us to ensure it does not lose the values he represents. This is a striking moment here, obviously, Craig, because his testimony was so crucial during that impeachment inquiry that we saw taking place last November. Alexander Vindman, as well as his twin brother, both being ousted from the National Security Council after the impeachment ended, in effect, for the president. The bottom line here, though, is that he is leaving his service, as there were some discussions that have been reported that he was about to be promoted to colonel. It appeared clear that wasn't going to occur, and now, as a result, it appears that he's going to be ending his service with the U.S. military. Craig, back to you.
Any idea what Colonel Vindman does now, Peter? Did the lawyer say what his next steps may be professionally?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we do not have an answer yet to that question from this statement here, but you'll remember the sort of key takeaway from his testimony was he said, "Here, right matters." That's what he said when he was testifying before Congress, and I think it's those words that will be lasting for a lot of people in terms of the service that he had over more than 20 years for this country.
Today, the Supreme Court delivered a win to the Trump administration and many religious institutes. The 7-2 ruling from the High Court upheld a Trump administration rule exempting employers with religious or moral objections from providing free birth control to employees on company insurance, as stipulated in the Affordable Care Act. If this case sounds familiar, it's because the topic was introduced to the court in
2014. At that time, the justices ruled that closely held companies with religious objections, like Hobby Lobby, were exempt from the mandate. The Obama administration then created a rule allowing religious groups to notify the government if they wanted contraceptives to be paid for directly through their insurance. However, some groups like the Catholic organization Little Sisters of the Poor wanted no part in the process, saying it made them complicit in sin. In 2017, President Trump issued an executive order expanding the exemption. His authority to do that was challenged by Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but upheld today by the High Court. Amber Strong, Newsy, Northern Virginia.
If you've had to put on the virus, you've got a lot fighting you.
And you're in a special position to help us fight back.
The plasma in your blood can literally save lives.
But we need to act fast.
Please donate plasma now. Please donate.
Donate. Donate.
Donate now.
You fought for your life. Now, let's take the fight to COVID-19. Go to the fight is in. us.org to find out how to donate.
Virginia's Capitol removed another Confederate statue on Wednesday. The Confederate Soldiers and Sailors statue is the sixth Confederate monument to be removed in Richmond amid nationwide protests following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody. The statue sat on a 73rd-foot pedestal in Libby Hill Park. The city's mayor recently ordered that all city-owned Confederate statues be removed. But one giant statue still stands, the one honoring Confederate General Robert E. Lee on Monument Avenue. Governor Ralph Northam ordered crews to remove it, but a pending court case has put that on hold. For Newsy, I'm Stephanie Sandoval.
The life of the Roma, Europe's largest ethnic minority with a population of around 6 million people, will be debated on Thursday at the European Parliament. The majority of Roma live in difficult conditions and are largely socially excluded from the societies in which they live.
We don't want to see anymore Roma having no access to water, to basic services, to be left without food or basic medical needs. Because that we actually saw during the pandemic. We saw those Roma were those who were actually left behind. If we don't invest now in specific targets, specific measures for this programming period, we would not actually have a good use of the next 7 years budget.
The latest Roma integration report from the European Commission shows that 78% live in overcrowded households, 50% have no indoor flush toilet or shower, 68% of children leave education early, 57% have no paid employment. The European Commission is due to release a new strategy on the rights of the Roma in October.
The strategy will better reflect the diversity among Roma, including by paying more attention to fighting multiple discrimination of Roma women, youth, LGBTI people, mobile citizens, migrant or stateless Roma.
This isn't enough, according to Romeo France, an MEP of Romani descent, who is urging the Commission to create binding rules and a supervising mechanism to ensure the rights of the Roma.
We must fight against anti-Gypsyism in the parliament too. When you don't fight against anti-Gypsyism, then you have no chance to implement strategies for inclusion for people with Romani background. And then, in the past, our people was not included in the solution. So, we would not ask, all the approaches was paternalistic approaches.
But fighting injustice with EU social and development funds could produce better results for the Roma, says another MEP.
So-called European Prosecution Office should be much more visible on the ground. Millions of euros and national currency level just disappeared. And if you take a look at the result, as I said, the money is gone and there is no visible result.
Thai officials have denied the use of monkeys to help harvest coconuts. The statement from the country's deputy agriculture minister comes after several British retailers said they would stop the shipment of products that were known to have used alleged monkey labor. UK retailer Morrisons has already pulled the products, and others like Boots and Ocado have vowed to do the same. An investigation into 13 facilities by PETA resulted in the accusations, which have been backed by Carrie Symonds, the fiancée of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. PETA is calling for Thailand to end the practice, or else they will continue to press retailers to ban their products. Ashley Bruno, manager for PETA's Asian division, said,
So we're hoping that they're going to make those changes, eliminate the use of monkeys in coconut picking, and instead rely on mechanized coconut picking as is done in other countries.
However, the deputy agriculture minister has denied the accusations, claiming that even with all the monkeys in the entire forest, there wouldn't be enough output in production because the country exports about 1 million tons of coconuts, adding, think about how many monkeys would we need for the 1 million tons of coconuts, going on to insist they use machines, and the only coconuts that are collected by monkeys are for provincial level consumption.
Also new this morning, the WNBA Players Association is calling on the league's commissioner to remove Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler as co-owner of the Atlanta Dream. This after Loeffler wrote a letter to the commissioner yesterday urging her to put an American flag on jerseys rather than the already approved anti-racist messages. In the letter, Loeffler writes that promoting particular agenda undermines the potential of the sport and sends a message of exclusion, and that we need less, not more, politics in sports. The league's commissioner releasing a statement in response, saying the WNBA will continue advocating for social justice, adding that Loeffler is no longer involved in the day-to-day operations of the team, though she has not been removed
Big things happening locally, though, in Montgomery County is where the biotech company Novavax is hard at work developing a vaccine for the coronavirus. And we're learning it could be ready by the end of the year. Maureen joins us now from Novavax headquarters in Gaithersburg with more. Morning, Mom.
Good morning to you, Steve and Allison. You know, this really could be a game changer in the fight against COVID-19. Novavax was seen as a dark horse in the game to find a vaccine for the cure. But right now, looks like we're getting $1.6 million. They're saying by the end of the year. They could have a vaccine, and then by February, they might be able to vaccinate 100 million people. This is all part of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed. It is designed to speed up development and